Good morning. Welcome to Day 3 of Disability Awareness Week 2022. My name is Peter Santiago, and I'm the Associate Director of Accessibility Services. We're the office on campus that supports students with disabilities here at KCC. And joining you today from land that was stolen and rightfully belongs to the Lenape people. It is my sincere hope that there is some way that we as a society can find a way to make amends to the generations of Indigenous peoples that have been forcibly removed from these lands and worse. This year, we've chosen to celebrate the whole person for Disability Awareness Week and the myriad of intersecting identities that are often overlooked in people with disabilities. We have panels, talks, and a screening that was scheduled, all presented by KCC faculty, staff, and students, as well as an off-campus featured speaker presenting intersectionality and disability, the lens of racism, transphobia, homophobia, and other marginalized identities and disability. That will be tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. Our hope is that this week's events will help to shape your perspective towards a strengths-based and holistic understanding of the identities of people with disabilities. Our first event of the day is presented by a very good colleague and friend of mine, Faith Fogelman. Faith will be talking to us about individual identity. So Faith, please take it away.
Oh, thank you, Peter, and welcome everybody. I'm very happy to be here. Disability Awareness Week. My job is to help you become more aware of individual and collective identities, which are part of the individual portfolios of people with disabilities. And I'd like to start by saying this. We make assumptions about people. We go on the subway and the doctor who took the day off is not well dressed or is not shaved, or she is not well groomed, and we make an assumption about that person. Assumptions are underscored when we talk about people with disabilities. We make all kinds of assumptions about their identity, including the fact that we think that their identity is consumed in the disability. This may or may not be the case. What I'd like to do today is have an interactive presentation. I hope that doesn't constitute confusion, but I would like to present. And as I'm presenting, if something strikes you, please feel free to make your comment. I have a lot of material. I'd like to get through it. But basically, I'll be talking about how people with disabilities develop identity. I'd like to cite the various components and elements and variables. Then I'd like to present 3 models of disability, and we together can plug in those variables into the 3 models. Now, models are not pure, they're not homogenized, but there are some variables that fit better with one model than the other. So let me start by saying that when people have a congenital disability, they are raised by family members, caretakers who have attitudes about disability. And many people feel that their child is different, and that's a problem. That's a reason for shame. It's a reason for family shame. It's something that is a negative reflection on them, the family member. But there are some people who are very sophisticated. They have a child with a disability, whether it's a physical or cognitive disability, and they say, okay, so you're a little different, so what? And the so what attitude may be a very good thing as the individual is growing up, because the parents don't necessarily feel that their kid is so different. The kid feels, okay, I'm not that different. And identity may be strengthened by being a member of a minority group or a religious group or an ethnic group, and that becomes the primary identity. Plus the personality of the individual, whether it's nature versus nurture or nurture versus nature, develops in a very healthy way. So many people, let's say, with a physical disability, which is nuanced, such as a mobility disability, where the person can't walk very well, is surrounded by people without disabilities. So he or she just has this extra functional limitation in certain cases, but the identity is not strong enough so that the individual feels a sense of shame or extreme difference. As a matter of fact, such a personality may not want to gravitate to other people with disabilities because A, he really doesn't or she really doesn't feel that his disability is his primary identity. And also, if he or she does, he wants to continue to have that special identity with the group without disabilities. You got that? It's a little complicated, but identity is something that's developed with a host of diverse interventions and personality. The outcome could be very high self-esteem. If you're raised in a very supportive family, you're not necessarily going to have low self-esteem because you have a disability. And that's an assumption that a lot of people make. Oh, look at Johnny. Oh, look at Mary. You see, she can't walk very well, so that's her primary identity. That's not necessarily the case. When you begin to talk to that person, you see a lot of strengths, and disability is not part of the conversation. I once had a client who was congenitally totally blind, and he said to me that when people talk to him and they assume that blindness is his primary identity, he gets annoyed. And he said to me, look, Faith, I'm a married man. I'm also a lover. I have a girlfriend on the side. I'm a student. I'm a father. I'm an employee. Oh yeah, I'm totally blind. I forgot all about it. He made a very, very good point. His identity was not rooted in his disability, but other people treated him like that. And this is comparable to seeing a relative at Thanksgiving, a relative you haven't seen in a long time. And that person treats you like a 10-year-old, but you're a 25-year-old. There's no match. There's no relationship. There's no dealing with the reality that the identity has changed in that case. Does anybody have a comment or question so far? Because I'm putting out a lot of material here. We're talking about the development of an identity that may or may not be rooted in the disability itself. It could be rooted in a lot of different things. And sometimes, using the example of the individual with a disability nuance, when that person comes to campus, he doesn't or she doesn't, I'll say he, we don't have the right pronoun in English, so I'll say he, but you know it could be she. He doesn't have the motivation necessarily to associate or affiliate with other people who have disabilities. He or she may come to our wonderful AAS program, but there is no social motivation to be among other people with disabilities. So as someone's growing up, esteem, and that's true of people with or without disabilities, can be impacted by disability. People can feel stigmatized, or maybe not. Maybe they are very, very healthy and they get a lot of support from their family. And as I said before, their primary identity is not disability. It just isn't. People can have different life management skills, and people with disabilities don't necessarily suffer with poor life management skills. This is an assumption we make. The independence, the functional abilities can be on par with everybody else, and the interests can be on par with everybody else. Women who have physical disabilities may want to look just as beautiful as people without disabilities. Guys with disabilities may take an interest in sports. We can't make an assumption that just because you have X, that means that you are Y. That is a failure on our part. A lot of people also have hidden disabilities, and hidden disabilities become known with a trigger. So somebody with asthma who is given roses for her birthday may have an asthmatic attack and may manage the environment to the best of her ability. But when there's a trigger, everybody knows. Now, when that's exposed, how does that person react? It depends on the individual. We can't assume there's shame. We can't assume there's forthright confidence. We have to look at every single person. And people with cognitive disabilities go through the same process. They can be supported by family members. They can be seen as a problem in the family, but maybe their identity will surpass anything in the environment. We just don't know. As disability service providers on campus, as well as people who are living in society, we have to look at every single person because we do not know their background, their identity, the support they had, the hell they had to go through, or the love that they got. We just don't know. And people with disabilities are very, very good at self-regulation. We assume they can't, we assume a lot. When I worked with individuals with visual disabilities at the Associated Blind, we once had a forum that really said it all. We had the board of directors interact on a panel with some of our clients. And the board member said, when I see somebody walking with a cane, I assume they want my help. And so I am a little annoyed that when I say, let me take you where you want to go, the person responds, or the person in this case did respond by saying, absolutely not. I know where I'm going. So there was an assumption that there was a functional limitation, and I, the board member who had sight, would be able to take that person to his destination. That it was not the case. And it was very rewarding to see that the person, the people on the panel with visual disabilities made it very clear. Don't assume I need your help. Don't make that assumption. Disability Awareness Week, my contribution is awareness of assumptions. And as I said before, not everybody with a disability wants to affiliate with other people who have disabilities the same or other disabilities. We just don't know. Okay. Let me point out the various, or the three, I should say, the three models of disability. And let's see if we can put in our variables into these three models. The first is the biomedical model. The biomedical model says disability is a medical problem. So let's address it. Let's boost that person up to the optimal level of functioning and forget about the social side, forget about anything else. Just get the medical issue addressed. If it's a physical disability, if it's a cognitive disability, let's get that person up to par with everybody else through education, through this and that, because we can't worry about the social aspect. Now, if parents are very supportive of a child with a congenital physical disability, this model may be wonderful because as far as those parents are concerned, there's a medical problem, we'll take care of it, it's done. The social aspect is something else. We don't feel stigmatized, we don't feel drained, we want to support our child so that he functions to the best of his ability. But it may also be negative because those parents might think, oh, we have a perpetual medical problem in our family. What are we going to do? He'll never walk. Such shame. That kid may have issues of self-esteem based on nurture rather than nature. Sometimes it's neighbors, and sometimes it's extended family members like aunts and uncles and cousins who are contemporaries who say, oh, no, we like Johnny, we don't see the medical issue, we can have fights with Johnny, Johnny can come and play basketball with us in whatever way he can. What is the issue? And those individuals really contribute to the positive identity and self-identity of such a person with a disability. The next model is the functional model, and that's seen at work and in post-secondary education as well as kindergarten through 12th grade. Functional model means you can't function like everybody else. It may not be a medical condition, but you're not up to par. Ironically, when this country, the United States, was more of a labor-intensive, physical labor-intensive industrial society, people with physical disabilities had a disadvantage. People with psychiatric or cognitive disabilities didn't have it. Now it's a little reversed. We're more of a service industry society. We have a lot of services so that people with physical disabilities who don't have cognitive issues are more employable. The functional model says, what can you do and what can't you do? And what do you need for accommodations? And are those accommodations fair? The functional model is why we in post-secondary education provide accommodations. We don't address the medical issue of the student, but we address the level of functioning. Unfortunately, when this model developed, it was also called role failure. You can't do something. But if the person has come from a family where there was a lot of support and the post-secondary professional or the employer is saying, you can't do something, there's not a lot of damage to the self-esteem because the person has more confidence than the post-secondary provider or the employer knows. And he can overcome any kind of negative attitude by saying, yeah, I can do this with an accommodation. No, I can't do that. That's out of my ability. And so there is an engagement process. And if people providing accommodations have assumptions, then there's a lack of communication and a lack of respect. If the person has an adventitious disability, meaning it happened after birth, then we're dealing with a different identity model altogether. This is somebody whose personality may have developed before the onset and may have different attitudes towards assumptions about self. And those attitudes can be very, very strong. When we see somebody come into the disability office and that person is using a cane, a wheelchair, or whatever it is, we can't assume that condition was from birth. It may be, but it may not be. And we don't know with whom we're dealing. Again, awareness cancels or at least reduces assumptions. The functional model, by the way, is not as understood as the biomedical. Most people get a biomedical model. You can't do something because you need medical attention, get the medical attention. With functional limitation, it's not as understood because of something known as hidden or invisible disabilities. People in the disability office go through this all the time when our students come to us and they say, we're not believed. We have a hidden disability, but nobody really understands what that means. Professors can have PhDs in biochemistry, but not understand that somebody can have an invisible physical disability, or people can have a learning disability, which doesn't impact all areas of learning, but only some. And so it's nuanced. I guess the theme of people with hidden or invisible disabilities is always explaining what they cannot do. People with obvious or visible physical disabilities are always explaining what I can do. We have to be aware of it. The third model is an interesting model. It's called the socio-political model, and that's the collective identity model. This is the group where people say, look, I may have a disability, it doesn't have to be treated medically. I am aware of my functional limitations, and I am part of a group. Parenthetically, it's this group, people who belong to this model, who were very active in getting ADA passed because it was a collective problem. When they saw that subway staircase, they didn't say, oh, it's my problem. How am I going to negotiate? The people who belong to this model said, no, it's our problem. It's our problem, our meaning people with disabilities, but it's also a societal problem. It's also a societal problem. Society needs to address our needs. So you better build elevators or escalators to accommodate us. This is a very vocal group. As a matter of fact, if you recall, many years ago and for many years, there was something known as the Jerry Lewis Telethon. And people who put themselves in the socio-political model hated the telethon because they felt that people watching it would always feel sorry for people with muscular dystrophy or multiple sclerosis. And they would always have this pity and compassion. So this group became very vocal as Jerry's orphans. And they said, no, forget the medical model. We are entitled to respect, not pity. We are together. We're going to change laws because we can't change your stupid attitudes. And they became very, very vocal as Jerry's orphans because they wanted no part of the medical model. They wanted very little part of the functional limitation model. We are as we are. And don't tell us how we should be, have to be. The point of the should was really borne out by a book by Robert Scott. He, in 1969, wrote a book called The Making of Blind Men. I think he lost his vision later in life, and he went to social service agencies which address the needs of people with visual disabilities. He was totally blind. And he was told how to be as a totally blind man. Shh, don't talk a lot. You know, just, it was very regimented. And he said, you know what? If I get the services from this agency, I'll learn mobility and orientation. Yeah, that's true. But my esteem will suffer and my identity will suffer. Just because I lost my vision doesn't mean I have to play a role that is put on me by an external source. I am assertive, I am a man, I will state my opinion, and I don't want to be told, shh, 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 blind man. So he wrote this book, The Making of Blind Men. It's a very, very good book, and it's very role-based. And people with disabilities don't want to be in any role. They want to be themselves. Any questions so far? Any issues, any comments? Should I address something in the chat?
Well, we have Margot that's kind of been having a conversation with you as the session has gone on.
Okay.
Forgive me, I tend to talk a lot because I'm a disability activist. Excuse me.
No, not at all. We welcome the comments. Thank you.
Do you want to verbalize your comments?
So far, I'm loving your presentation. I think you really have a very good understanding of the disability community, because I see a lot of the psychological patterns that you're mentioning. Like me, I had a very solid family foundation, so I didn't have some of the internalized ableism that a lot of my friends who had very unsupportive family members that called them burdens don't have. And one of the new things for me in your presentation, you know, I'm always doing disability work, functional model I had never heard of. So I definitely learned something new today. So thank you. I'm really enjoying this.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad. I'm glad. There is also something known as the religious model. I didn't get into that yet.
Yeah, my friends call it moral model, so it goes by different names.
It does, it does. And one of the problems with the religious model is that many houses of worship need to open their doors wider for congregants with disabilities. A very, very good book was written on the subject. It's called Opening Doors Wider, something like that. It was published by Brooks Publication. And basically it talks about the fact that many religious circles, as an aside, there's an assumption that everyone could get into the sanctuary, everybody understands the service, everybody can hear the rabbi or the priest or the minister or the imam, anybody, you know, it's neutralized. But nowadays we're moving towards a better society where disability is recognized in religious spheres. And there's been research, and one of the disabilities that's very difficult for a lot of clergy are people with learning disabilities or people on the spectrum who have a nuance.
If I can break in here for a second, I actually have a friend who's got mild autism, who's actually becoming a rabbi to try to address this issue. She took it on herself to try to fix that because she felt it was so sorely lacking that now she's getting the training. That's how far it had to go. She had to do that herself.
Oh, that's interesting. And you know why that is? That's because if somebody has a physical disability that's visible, or somebody can identify an invisible physical disability, people understand that. People understand nuances. But when you're dealing with nuances concerning autism or learning disabilities, the pattern of interaction can be a little disturbing, quote unquote, or erratic. So you think you're communicating, and you are, and then the conversation becomes a little confusing. You don't understand the reaction. You don't understand the question. It seems to have come out of the blue. So I'm glad that your friend is addressing this issue, the religious, or you say the moral model. I'd like to go back to the subject of an individual, whether congenitally or adventitious, or who has a congenital or adventitious condition, who doesn't want to be a part of the socio-political model. As I mentioned before, there are people who go through life with a disability who appreciate ADA. They would never have been at the forefront, but they appreciate the benefits of it. But their social life, their family life, their religious life is not with people with disabilities. They are the only one. And as I've said before, some of them like that, some of them don't think about it, so I can't walk well, big deal. And the people around them say the same thing, so you can't walk well, big deal. And they don't have the need to socialize and be part of a group. And we providers must appreciate that too. There are people with disabilities who don't have a heavy identity as having a disability, or they have it, but it doesn't stop them from deciding on who their friends are. And they usually gravitate to people for whatever reason without disabilities. And people with disabilities have choices. I know of a very fine individual. I dated him for a while, and he wasn't for me. And I have a friend who has a sister with one arm. And I said to this guy after a few dates, we could be friends, but I have a friend who has a sister, and I think that you and this individual might have a good time if you go out together. And he said, sure. And I called her up, and she said to me, Faith, did you tell him I have one arm? I said, no. I don't think of you as someone, and I went through a whole speech. And she said to me, no, Faith, you call him back and you tell him I have one arm, because I'm sick and tired of answering the door only for somebody to say, oh, you have one arm. In the winter, I will wear my prosthesis. In the summer, I don't wear anything. When I told him, this is a guy with a PhD in one of the sciences, nuclear physics, very, very smart guy. Maybe I should have married him. He had a visceral reaction. And then he realized he would be a heel and he'd look bad if he said no. He finally said yes. I said, you're not doing me a favor, you're not doing her a favor. He said, no, I'll go out with her. So we went out with her. And I told him she has one arm, and he went out with her. He called me up. He said he'd never met such a lovely person. And he wanted to go out with her again. She didn't like him. Now, usually when I tell people this story, they think that the two of them got married. That's a nice, happy ending. But she didn't want him. So we assume that people with disabilities, especially something as severe as not having an arm, are not in the position of making choices. She's a physical therapist, by the way, and she did very well in life, and she's doing very well in life, and she got married, and she could make choices. We can't make assumptions about people with disabilities, whether it's the people with whom they socialize, the choices they make, who their friends are, what their level of life management skills happen to be, what their background is. There's a lot that contributes to identity development. And we know that because all of us have developed our own identity, maybe rooted in something besides disability, maybe rooted in something besides disability, even if we have a disability. So we can't look at somebody and assume we know that person's story. We simply do not. And when people are assertive with us, when people are confrontational, or when people are too passive, or when professors just don't get it, people are individuals, and we have to see them as individuals as we want to be seen as individuals. And we don't know what the source of the development was when the disability surfaced, if it was congenital or not, how the person relates to his disability. People in the socio-political model, and I've spoken to many of them, I've worked with many of them, they don't feel that they have a disability. It's just something that's different rather than a disability. And we have no right to take that identity away. If they believe it's a difference, it's a difference. And that's it. When I work with the blind, I work with a young woman who didn't think that she was totally blind. Yes, she knew it, but she didn't want to act like she had a disability. And it was almost a comic scene because she'd come into my office, she'd crash into the desk, but that wasn't a problem for her. She found her way to the seat. She'd walk down the street. She had orientation and mobility training. And she went and the light was red for her. She depended on the kindness of strangers not to run her over. Telling her that she needs to be cautious and act like a typical person with a visual disability for her own safety was useless. Her identity was, I'm totally blind, big deal. I'm going to go through life the way I want to go through it. And that's it. And she did. And she's still functioning the same way. And she's alive and happy. That's the good news. People with disabilities, by the way, can have a terrific sense of humor about their disability. And we don't think that there's a lighter side. I don't think if people without disability, I don't think people who don't have disabilities should make jokes. But if people with disabilities make fun about their own disability, that's up to them. You know, they can do that. I had a client who was losing her vision, and then she lost it all. And she was very happy. She said, oh, good, it can't get any worse. That was her approach. A few weeks after she lost her vision, she was in her apartment and the doorman rang that she has a package. She forgot that she couldn't see. So she went down and then she realized, uh-oh, how am I going to get back upstairs? I don't have my cane. I have this package. She forgot. When I went with her into the supermarket, people asked a lot of questions. And when she paid, she sorted her money in a certain way. And there was a very curious customer who went over to her and said, how do you distinguish 10s from 20s? And this client with a terrific sense of humor said, don't you know, 20s are thicker, and 10s are thicker than 5s, and 5s are thicker than 1s. And the woman was aghast. She said, I didn't know that. When the woman went away, I said to my client, how can you tell her that? She said, look, Faith, I'm blind. I have to figure things out. Let her figure things out. The humor was extremely interesting. She just was very, very forthright, and she used curiosity by strangers as a way to show that they don't know the capabilities of people without vision. And she socked it to them in the form of humor. And her identity, by the way, remained that of somebody who can't see. but not somebody who's totally blind. Any questions so far? Any issues? Any comments?
I just have to say that I'm very much enjoying all of the stories of your clients and all of the facets that you're teaching us about various identities. Thank you.
Well, yes, identity. It's very important for people to have a solid identity, people in general, and people to go through Erickson's 8 stages of man, the 8 stages of identity. There's no reason anybody with any kind of disability can't get through it. It's good to know who you are, but to know that whoever you are, people are going to have reactions to you. And how do you handle that? Whether you have a disability or not. Other people may not be bright, they may not be sensitive, they may not be aware, and they may make assumptions about you that are totally wrong. How do you handle that? People with disabilities can handle it very, very well through humor, and sometimes not with humor. When I worked with individuals who were called retarded, and there are 5 levels, borderline, there are 5, severe, profound, borderline, environmental, moderate, severe, profound. There was a moderately retarded young man who always bought me coffee and who always asked for reimbursement because I always came late. I guess I come late to all my jobs, but that's another story. And he charged me $1.50. So I assumed that the coffee was $1.50. One day I came on time and I bought my own coffee, same size. And the guy said $1. I said, $1? Isn't it $1.50? When I went in and I saw in this group setting, this individual, I held the coffee up and I went like this, and he got it. He charged me $1.50 for weeks on end for coffee that was $1. I assumed that my client is an honest guy. He was a very good businessman. He made a little bit of money on my naivete. It was okay, but he never did that again. His identity was that of, I'm going to outsmart this new counselor until she finds out that I'm outsmarting her. I assumed, my assumption was he was correct, but he wasn't. So when we talk about identity, people can develop identity based on so many variables: family, support, relationship with the disability, relationship with others, how people are treated, how people react. One of the saddest situations that I faced, maybe sad is not the right word, but I guess over the lifespan it would be, there were many clients with whom I worked who were totally blind due to retrolental fibroplasia, which of course was too much oxygen in the incubator for premature babies born in the early 1950s. Doctors thought if a little oxygen is good, a lot is even better, but it blinded them. And some of them went to the same school together. And like Mr. Scott said, they were told to be very good, quiet children. And there was contempt for them. And a lot of those clients internalized the contempt. And as adults, they still did it. But a lot of those classmates didn't internalize that contempt. So there was a case where groups of people went to the same school, all totally blind. Some of them emerged with a healthy identity that the people in the schools had a problem, and some of them internalized the contempt, even as adults. So what do we want out of life? We want to know who we are. We want to understand how we got to where we are. And people I understand, I know, have different abilities for that understanding. But to be rooted in a unified and cohesive identity so that we react appropriately to self and we act appropriately to others. We know our abilities. We know our comfort level. We know disclosure or not disclosure of disability according to our needs and ability. It's not one size fits all. And to be comfortable with who we are and to appreciate what we have and what we have to give to other people. And with that, I will conclude. And I thank you, and I hope you have some questions or issues.
Thank you, Faith. That was great. I just want to clarify one point for our audience. I'm sure that you're aware of this, but we no longer use the R word. We use person with an intellectual disability.
Well, I said that because that's how the agency referred to people.
Right, yeah, no, I understand in this context. I just wanted to make sure other people understood.
Yeah.
But any questions or comments from our attendees, audience?
I did have one comment. I thought like your analysis of like social political model was very interesting. And I know this from personal experience. A lot of the other people that you're talking about who don't really want to associate with the disability community, maybe they're like sure of themselves, maybe they're in a role where like the disability just doesn't come up. I noticed when I worked with people who are very active with social political model, they would try to force that sort of social political model view onto the people that didn't really want to be in the disability community. Like, we need our rights. You need to be around disabled people all the time. It's weird that you want to be with able-bodied people. And I just felt that was completely unacceptable. So I moved away from like those types of people, because it was not healthy for my mental health either. But one of the things that I just dislike in the disability community is we're not allowed to have individual identities. We have to have this group identity that's very, very political, or we're just kind of like, oh, you have too much internalized ableism to communicate with us, instead of like, no, maybe this person has a different life approach and maybe you need to listen to that so you can accommodate them better. So I'm glad that you brought that there's a whole spectrum of identities that people can have that are perfectly legitimate in and of themselves, so good work.
Hi, Faith. I wanted to say thank you for your in-depth on the identity, because as a person, an older person who became disabled as an older person, I had to find my identity and where I sat in there. And it's a very odd thing, because when I asked somebody who had been disabled, a younger student at Kingsborough, who had been disabled from birth, which he thought would be the better position to be in, and he said that he felt sorrier for me in my position, because I understood and knew what it felt like to just be a regular person. And I didn't know anything about how it felt to be a disabled person. And I had to learn that, as opposed to him, who naturally he was just normal because that's the way he was born. He was born into a family that was on the lighter side of who did not enable him. He had to do things on his own, and he was very, very independent with what he did. And I found it interesting, because I thought that he would say that he felt sorrier for himself. But because of the identity that he had through the parent and the raising that he had, he developed a very healthy identity towards his disability, whereas I did not have that type of identity yet. I had to learn how to create that kind of identity, which is a lot harder for a person when they're in their 50s as opposed to being born with it. So, I mean, your separation and understanding of the identities was very, very succinct, and I really appreciated it. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And Faith, we have a couple of hands raised. First, we have Professor Bruno Gulli with his hand up, and then
Yes.
Stella Woodruff is next.
Yes, hi, thanks. Thank you for the presentation. Really, I very much liked it. I'll be speaking next, and what I will do in my presentation very much, in a very intimate way, connects to what you said, Faith. So I really, I will say more, of course, in about 15 minutes, but I really enjoyed the highlights on questions of identity and the awareness or the lack of awareness, perhaps. I mean, the lack of awareness in societies at large, and perhaps the awareness on the part of people who have disabilities. And I will also speak more about this problematic word, because of course disability is an umbrella term that is used for so many various physical and or mental impairments, but I really like the also I work with the question of identity in philosophical terms. My presentation will be informed by both personal and philosophical experience. So I just wanted to say thank you. I think it's really important, to hear this as well, and to be able to connect what I will do to what you have just done. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And I just posted in the chat the registration link for Professor Gulli's presentation, which is going to happen just after this one. So if anyone is interested, please click the link. So Stella's up next.
I want to say I'm very happy that this, like all the other sessions, it's being recorded. But I'm especially happy that this one is being recorded because Faith, you were awesome as usual. And, but I think that you made some very important points that I think need to be heard by many people who are not here. And I certainly hope we get your permission to share it with others. Very, very important. The other thing I wanted to say, and I know that we are focused on the person with the disability, but I think we also have a lot of students who have family members with disabilities. Mm-hmm. And how they react to that person with the disability is also part of their identity, and very much a part of even how they react in our environment to the diversity and different aspects of disability that they see. So I know that we're not talking about that, but I would hope that as people listen to what you say, they also think in terms of the person who is a family member, a parent, a caregiver, or something to a person with a disability, and not just dismiss it that, well, I don't have a disability. But you may be in the same position as of disability impacting on your identity based on a family member.
I'm glad you raised that, Stella. Sometimes there are attitudes towards people with disabilities that are extended to family members, including siblings. Yes. And there's a very good book called Brothers and Sisters. And that book discusses that very issue. And you don't really have to read the book, but look at the pictures of the sibling with a disability with his siblings without disabilities. And you get a full understanding, not even by reading a word of the book, about the attitudes people have, siblings have. Some of them are loving, some of them are supportive. Some of their siblings don't want to really be in the picture with their sister. So, and it runs the gamut of every nationality and ethnic group that there is. It's a wonderful book, Brothers and Sisters, also by Brook Publications.
Yeah, Faith, perhaps all of the resources you're providing to us are amazing. I'm wondering if maybe you could draft those up as a list, and I could send that to the registrants so that people could take advantage of these books.
Yeah.
Great. All right, so we have another person with their hand up. I believe it's Izamal. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Actually, it was very, very interesting. Actually, I was taking the history class, and my professor's pair is forward me this link, and he told me that you can just join and get more information. Recently, as a person before said, my son was diagnosed as ADHD, and I don't know what to do with that, and I don't know how to deal with that. I didn't know what to do, where to go. So yes, this was very, very helpful lecture, and I think it will be helpful for students who has family members has a disability to know, to get more information about any like disability issues or problems will be helpful.
I will be glad to do that, and I thank you, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your lecture. It was so interesting. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bruno, did you want to make one more comment?
If there is one final moment, yes, I'll be speaking soon. I will connect precisely to this last point being made, along with other things as well, the question of siblings. I mean, I will be speaking from that perspective precisely. And so I appreciate this very much, because very often it's completely, overlooked in its importance. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Yeah, and I echo everyone's sentiment. This was a great talk. I personally learned a lot, and I thank you for putting your time and effort into this presentation. It seems like it was well received, and for our audience, thank you for coming. And I hope to see you at some of the rest of our events, where I think today ended up shaping up to be about language, right? And the kinds of language we use when referring to, describing, speaking with people with disabilities. So we have Professor Gooley up next to talk about the philosophy of ableism. But then at 4 o'clock, we have a student group on campus, Students Unlimited. Margot is one of our members. That's going to be having an open discussion about the word disability, normal, ableism, person first versus identity first language. And these are generally people with disabilities talking about what their experience is like. So I hope folks can make it at 4 o'clock. I also posted the full agenda in the chat. That was the second link. So please click that link if you want to check out the rest of our events for this week. But Faith, again, thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you in the office again. Take care, everybody.